Hi, and welcome to the Australian Institute of International Affairs. My name is Teresa Yasin, and I'm here with Natalie Sambhi from the Perth US Asia Centre. Thank you, Natalie, for being here today.
Thank you for having me.
I'll start by asking, since we're talking about about Indonesia and its maritime security and policies, I'll start by asking, can you briefly explain President Jokowi's Maritime Doctrine and the global maritime fulcrum?
Sure. So when President Jokowi was elected in October 2014, one of the first things he did was announce his emphasis on the maritime domain in Indonesia, both domestically and in foreign policy terms. And he did that by introducing this concept called the global maritime fulcrum. And it had 5 component parts, which included emphasis on maritime tourism, investing in maritime culture, building the local fishing industry, looking after Indonesian sovereignty, and looking after maritime infrastructure as well. So that has been the departure point for many of his policies. That's intended to invest in developing grassroots concerns, but also leave some room for engaging with foreign partners as well.
So since this maritime doctrine is one of his main policies, how do you think this policy approach affects Indonesia domestically and internationally?
Well, certainly. Some of the component parts of global maritime fulcrum involve boosting the local fishing industry, for instance. So I'll take the example of illegal fishing. Jokowi is very much concerned about illegal fishing in Indonesian waters. So in order to protect Indonesia's natural resources, he's given the portfolio to a very strong and very entrepreneurial woman called Susi Pujiastuti, who's gone along to overhaul the fishing industry. Which is all well and good, but as part of cracking down on illegal fishing, there's been a couple of ruffled feathers with international partners whereby foreign fishing boats have been caught in the region and blown up. So there's a domestic part of the policy which is meant to protect natural resources, but that can also cause some friction in implementation with foreign partners as well. And those partners have included China, Japan, Thailand, and Taiwan.
In your opinion, what collaborative opportunities does the maritime doctrine present to Indonesia in terms of maritime defence and trade with Australia?
That's interesting, actually, because many people believe because Jokowi has emphasised the maritime domain that there will be natural complementarity with countries wishing to engage in the maritime sphere. And I believe that's true for countries like China, wishing to invest in maritime infrastructure, and countries like the United States, which is keen to develop Coast Guard cooperation with Indonesia. But with Australia, the relationship is a little bit different. The relationship under Jokowi has been a little bit rocky. So while Australia might be receptive and pushing for cooperation under the maritime domain, we'll have to be a little bit cognizant of what the broader relationships health is in, whether or not, and to see whether or not Jokowi will take us up on that. But if we were to seek, to highlight certain areas of cooperation, some of those might be for shipbuilding, and particularly for patrol boats.
In light of the decision from the UN Permanent Court of Arbitration on the case of Philippines versus China, how do you think the decision will affect Indonesia?
Well, it's been clear that China has said that it will not abide by any of the ruling handed down by the Court of Arbitration. And so it depends to some degree whether or not the new Philippines President Duterte, will take a more collaborative and cooperative approach with Beijing or pursue a bit more of a hardline approach. That kind of action by the Philippines may have some sort of impact on ASEAN unity, and it will remain to be seen whether or not Indonesia will take much more of a leadership role in that grouping.
And in regards to ASEAN, how important is it for ASEAN countries to collaborate to promote maritime security within its waters?
It's extremely important, and I'll give you a good example. 3 times this year alone, there have been Indonesian sailors who've been kidnapped by the Philippines extremist group Abu Sayyaf. And as a result, Indonesia, the Philippines, and Malaysia have agreed to do more in terms of cooperating on maritime terrorism and piracy. So that's just one example in that domain where insecurity has actually encouraged trilateral cooperation. And there are other examples in terrorism. For instance, there's been a newly released Malay language newspaper from the Islamic State, which means that Malay-speaking countries, the Philippines, Malaysia, Brunei, and Indonesia, and even parts of Singapore will have to work together on this particular issue. And so while that's not directly maritime related, there are many related issues in the security realm in which ASEAN will have to get it together.
And speaking of the Islamic State, how do you think the Maritime Doctrine will help or will affect Indonesia in terms of fighting terrorism?
It's interesting because terrorism doesn't actually appear directly in the Global Maritime Fulcrum Doctrine, but there has been an emphasis in Indonesia lately about building nationalism, and part of that has been in order to counter radicalisation. So if Jokowi wanted to promote a sense of Indonesian identity as part of Global Maritime Fulcrum, that could be one way, but terrorism is not directly addressed as part of his vision so far.
Thank you, Natalie. And if you'd like to see more, visit www.internationalaffairs.org.au.